Futurama is easily my all-time favorite show. It's one of the few things I've been able to enjoy equally as much since the day I started watching it. I heard it once said that Futurama has such a broad sci-fi concept that it's inaccurate to even say that the sky's the limit when it comes to the subject matter of the show. It's more accurate to say that all of space and time is the limit, and they did take advantage, certainly. Each episode was packed with boundless imagination, wit, and not an unreasonable amount of heart. No show that I can think of can make you laugh and cry with the same frequency as Futurama. The thing I appreciate about it most looking back is that it managed to avoid the trappings of a lot of adult animation and managed to be mature without having to resort to lowbrow gags at every opportunity. It still has those, but it doesn't rely on them. It was clever without talking down to you, it was funny without being bombastic, it kept a lot of plates spinning in the air and managed to balance them perfectly. Though I have not touched the most recent revival because I just had a gut feeling that it was probably gonna be crap. And I have a personal policy against making myself angry in my own home. Unfortunately, it looks like I broke that policy. Here's the thing, I know I went on record as saying that I never really wanted to play another crappy tie-in game ever again, but if I'm being honest, I've known about the Futurama game for a very long time and I've always wanted to play it. But I was also never able to because this is a game that was rare and very expensive. Even at the point when PS2 games were dirt cheap, this one was still $60 to $80 and that price has only shot up. At time of writing, if you want a copy, you're looking to pay at least $250 and upwards of $450. So it's innately restrictive, but as they say, life finds a way. This video was brought to you by our sponsor today, Emulation. Quicker, cheaper, easier. So when I had the sudden urge to check this game out and remembered that this was an option, well, it was a no-brainer. So after being a fan for more than half my life, it's finally time to play this piece of crap. So pour yourself a glass of molten boron, grab a bag of Glagnar's human rinds, and let's do this. Futurama the game was made by a company called, brace yourselves, Unique Development Studios. That's right up there with Intelligent Systems as being one of the worst video game developer names in history. And UDS made a whole lot of nothing in their existence, and in fact, this would be their last full game before shutting down in 2004, though their last project did get picked up by a different company. Meanwhile, this game came out on August 1st, 2003 in PAL regions and August 12th, 2003 in North America. And August of 2003 is a significant month for the series because that was the very same month the show got cancelled for the first time, which would go a ways to explain why the game fell out of print so quickly and why it's so rare these days. Fox had already mismanaged the series up to that point, so it's no stretch to say they mismanaged this project, not advertising it, and pulling it from sale the moment it underperformed. Hey, did you know that Fox is a running joke in multiple shows on Fox? Just thought I'd point that out. Even still, the game is presented like an episode of the show, right down to including all the appropriate music cues.
Good news, everyone! I've sold Planet Express to Mom!
Love it. Granted, the plot of the game is slightly higher stakes than the average episode. The professor sells Planet Express to Mom, and with that, Mom now owns more than 50% of the Earth. As such, she's become the supreme ruler of Earth, which is a bit incongruous with the rest of the series, seeing as the running joke with her is that she never goes publicly mask off. But she rules the world now, so she probably has no reason to keep the mask on. However, she wants to turn the Earth into a mobile warship and take over the universe with it, and due to plot-related shenanigans, the Professor is the only one who can build her a dark matter engine that big. Naturally, it's completely ridiculous and only gets more ridiculous as time travel gets involved, but that's par for the course. So really, the only thing that matters to me at this point is whether or not it's actually funny, and it has its moments. I think the absolute best line in the entire game is right at the beginning.
So I pawned... You pawned it? Why? For the same reason everyone pawns everything in America. To get a gun.
And it has no small amount of sight gags like this.
To the ship!
But the writing is kind of generic comedy-wise. Like, the situations these characters find themselves in are properly grandiose, but the dialogue just doesn't have the punchiness to sell it. Like, there's one particular moment that's really indicative of this game's writing. It's during one of the final cutscenes when the gang has come back in time to explain to the professor what happened, and explain that Mom turned the Earth into a giant warship, and this happens.
Man, that was cool. Earth is all... And the other planets are like...
It's slow-paced, it's drawn out, and it's really irritating. Like, they're somehow convinced that if they keep talking, somebody ought to laugh. Well, I didn't. Plus, this game also leans a bit too heavily on self-reference.
Has anyone ever noticed how Fry always seems to turn on the TV at just the right moment?
Or look at us, we're a video game jokes.
So now I can die and come back to life like Fry? Does that mean?
Yes, you're a playable character.
This is the happiest day of my life.
That can work at times, such as explaining away the live system by having the professor make a device called the Reanimator that automatically resurrects you when you die, which is actually pretty genius, and they also make it a running joke that it looks like a giant toaster.
That big toaster.
But the self-reference can get a bit tiresome at times, especially because of the sheer volume. Pointing and laughing at yourself is a tiresome and cheap comedy tool that's funny maybe once, just as a subversion of expectations, but once the joke is established and the fourth wall is officially broken down, it stops being funny. So whether we're talking about this, or the dialogue choices that just aren't particularly funny, or situations that could theoretically be funny but go on for so long that any potential humor is sucked out of it, if this were a proper episode of the show, it would probably be one of the lesser ones in the series, and I know that because my first exposure to this game's story was as an episode. You see, in the DVD extras of The Beast with a Billion Backs, they compiled all the game's cutscenes into a 28-minute episode, and I'll admit, I did find it kind of weak. Comedy is subjective, I know that, there's no question, but I'm not really judging this by the standards of general comedy, I'm judging it by the standards of Futurama episodes, and I hold those to a high standard. I mean, I know the writer, J. Stuart Burns, is fully capable of writing decent comedy. He wrote some pretty excellent episodes of Futurama, as well as... wait, he wrote Spyro: A Hero's Tale? The hell? Well, I guess that explains the self-reference. I suppose that's just his style when writing video games. But whatever the reason, whether that be struggling with writing based on the standard game progression, or just not putting his best foot forward because it's a game, who cares? It certainly doesn't measure up, though that might also partially have to do with the graphics as well, because, I don't know, something about the transition of 2D characters to 3D makes them feel more stiff, which makes the visual gags less funny. I guess it makes sense that they feel less animated because they're literally less animated, but there's a distinct lack of rubberiness to the animation that comes with 3D models over 2D animation. Plus, it also looks slightly uncanny. I don't know what it is about 2D art styles not translating into 3D very well. There's probably a grander psychology behind it. Either way, it's very rare for things to look equally good in 2D and 3D. This is no exception. There are token efforts to give the characters thick outlines as well as thick detail lines on their character models to give the impression of drawn lines and animation, but no matter how hard they try, there's no way to stop this from looking uncanny. Though as far as the other aspects of presentation go, I do give them credit in that they got most of the voice actors back. Not all of them though. Phil Lamar and Lauren Tom are two main characters who didn't make an appearance, so no Amy and no Hermes. Amy doesn't show up, but I do like their explanation for Hermes not being in the game in a speaking role, in that his brain has been taken over by a brain slug, so he's just sitting vegetative in his office, which is pretty funny. Plus, for what they're given, the character performances are actually pretty top-notch, just as you'd expect. It's almost indistinguishable from the actual TV show.
Hey, where are you two going?
Sorry, Leela. I'd love to help you save the sun, but I'd burn easily.
And I melt easily. But save me my share of the reward.
Which is great, because normally when people reprise their roles in video game form, they tend to half-ass it with the understanding that some video game performance isn't going to hurt their career. But they gave it their A-game here, and I do applaud them for that. Well, they do kind of half-ass it in the in-game dialogue sometimes, and I swear, if I have to listen to Fry talk about how he's finally as rich as the Pope one more time, I'm gonna do something very distasteful.
Finally, I'm as rich as the Pope.
So as a Futurama episode, it's decent, but on the weaker side, elevated by top-notch acting and brought down by the graphics restricting the overall presentation. So suffice it to say, as an attempted adaptation of Futurama, it's a mixed bag, and as a game, man, it's a bit of a tragedy. I mean, just think about all the amazing things that you could do with a Futurama game. Elite-style space exploration, delivery jobs, space combat, ground combat, maybe even having the ability to explore some open-ended areas like New York, Old New York, the Moon, and so on. They could even do like what South Park has done and make games based on specific episodes, like for example, the episode Less Than Hero where they turn into superheroes, or the episode Time Keeps on Slipping where the space-time continuum is fractured. Or how about this? I know it came out a bit later, but what about a game based on the movie Bender's Game? Hell, they could have literally reskinned the Galactic Conquest mode from Battlefront 2 with Futurama characters in different scenarios with different antagonists, from Mom to Santa, to Lur from Planet Omicron Persei 8, to the Brains, to an army of killbots and so on and so on and so on, and that would have been badass. Like the show itself, all of space and time is the limit for how creative you want to get with what you want to do with a game based on Futurama, but they decided to go with the absolute most generic possible choice. It's a bare bones as bare bones can get action platformer. You jump, you shoot, you jump, you shoot, you jump, you shoot. Although sometimes you don't even get to shoot because two of the three main characters don't get a gun. So you jump, you punch, you jump, you punch, you jump, you punch. I do not speak any hyperbole when I say I think they put more thought into justifying the oddities of video games into the Futurama world than they did thinking about what kind of game they actually wanted to make. The thing is though, simple can be good. It's all about creating something simple but also malleable so you can take the concept and fit it into multiple scenarios to create a variety worthy of a multi-hour game. Even though I'm not really a fan anymore, I think Crash Bandicoot is the king of that. Taking a simple concept and fitting it into many distinctive themes and level setups. And it's fitting that I bring Crash Bandicoot up because it became more and more apparent to me that this game is attempting to basically be an incredibly bare-bones version of Crash Bandicoot. The jump and attack style 3D platformer, if you ask me, is basically default game design. It's essentially what an AI would make if you told it to make a video game, and no, I'm not saying that's what Crash Bandicoot is necessarily, because like I said, it's the type of thing that takes a very simple concept and turns it up to 11 with a lot of ideas and gimmicks. The Futurama game is that, just without the ideas or the gimmicks. So at various points you play through as each of the three main characters. There is another bonus character, but we'll get to that. And each of the playable characters plays slightly differently. Fry's the one who has no hand-to-hand skill, and so he's the one who fights with ranged weapons. He gets a small handful of them, and if you've ever played a game, like at all, you probably know exactly what kind of weapons he gets. He gets his melee weapon, the hammer, which I never used past the first level. Then you get a pistol, a shotgun, and a machine gun. Standard stuff. Later on, you do get a fourth gun, a railgun, which is pretty fun to use, but you only get to use it for like 5 minutes. The reason why I never used the hammer past the first level is because that's when the first gun is introduced, and they start you off with a good amount of ammo, and ammo pickups are everywhere, so you literally never run out. And I don't mean run out of ammo universally, I mean you never run out of ammo for the weapon you're currently using, whatever that might be. You have to go out of your way to use up all your ammo. But even then, there's just no skill to the shooting. The lock-on can be a bit fiddly because there's no way to change targets, but as long as you're locking on to the correct enemy, it's basically impossible to miss. The lock-on stays stubbornly glued to whatever it's locked onto, like a bad case of crabs. You can also hold square for a more powerful shot, but it never really made a difference. Standard shots or charged, these enemies still pose next to no threat, except for the exploding pigs. Those can be a bit irritating, but but more so for the fact that they can take you off guard, but I died more from falling damage than enemies. Then after that you have Bender, who has no ranged attack even though he has his extendo arms that he seemingly forgot he has. First of all, he has the spins, so they're not doing much to dissuade the knockoff Crash Bandicoot accusations. Then he has a charge and also the ability to butt stomp. You know, for somebody who has such reverence for his shiny metal ass, he sure is putting it in the line of fire a lot. The only other addition is that you can collect these charges, and then if you press X and square at the same time, he'll use one to do a super attack, but the enemies are so generally weak that I rarely found a use for them other than just to use them. I guess I tended to use them if I had to fight more than one of these rock golems at once, but more so just to get the fight out of the way, because even though they can take significant chunks of your health, they're pretty much helpless to the butt drop. You know, I think I saw these rock golems in an online animation once. Let's not talk about that. And as for Leela, she also plays pretty much identically to Bender, although aside from having a dodge roll that's basically useless in combat but is sometimes used for puzzles and platforming, instead of spins and slides, she punches and kicks, making this visually resemble a brawler, but it doesn't change anything gameplay-wise. She still has the same super attack that Bender has, although it's shorter range, and as a matter of fact, I think that's the problem with Leela universally. The range of her attacks are always slightly shorter than I think they are. So I find that I keep unintentionally coming a bit short of enemies, which is annoying. It especially sucks when it comes to her super attack, which is the type of thing where you have to be all up in someone's grill before the attack connects. And it's one of those things that goes to make Leela's sections probably the hardest part of the game. Well, that and the fact that she's constantly dealing with kamikaze skeletons. And unlike Fry's pigs, there's no way to take them out from a distance, so all she can do is run away and hope that they explode before they get to you. So there you have it, 3 playable characters, each completely and utterly distinct. Not really. Their attacks are slightly different, but they all control basically identically, and even once you account for the fact that they do have slightly different attacks, Fry's being the most different, the combat in this game feels about as token as it gets. There's no strategy. You run up to enemies and press buttons until one of you falls over. It's perfectly functional, but no matter who you're playing as, it's simple to the point of being asinine. In fairness, they do somewhat change up the gameplay design throughout the game in the sense that the early levels are so linear as to essentially railroad you, whereas some of the later levels can be a bit more open-ended. But the actual level design is brain dead because the mechanics are so bare bones, there's nothing they can do to these levels in order to add unique challenges specific to this game's mechanics, and so everything is extremely basic. But that wouldn't be so bad if they at least gave you some decent challenges, but throughout a lot of the game, they have a tendency of throwing exactly one and only one obstacle in your way at a time for you to get past, whether that be an enemy or a level hazard. For me, I think the best parts of the game were the parts where they actually had skilled platforming sequences. Although I liked it a lot less when the game arbitrarily decided that the ledge grab wasn't going to work, or when my character, through no fault of my own, wouldn't climb up the ledges fast enough. But when things were functioning and they laid out a series of platforming challenges, I actually thought that the game had a spark of life at that point. Because believe it or not, basic as it might be, the platforming controls are actually very tight. There's a surprising precision to your movements, and the jumping feels just right. Like, it feels necessarily weighty, but your jump arc is also predictable and easy to work with, plus the hitbox for the platforming is quite forgiving. This game does have a habit of killing you instantly with hazards or falls, and there's always the looming threat of a game over, but I don't really mind the live system in this game, if only because, due to probably what was a design oversight, the collectibles reset every time you die relative to the corresponding checkpoint, but you also get an extra life every time you collect 25 of the character-based currency pickups, and if you die and collect the same collectibles you collected before you died and get a multiple of 25 using the same collectibles, you still get an extra life. So this game almost has an inbuilt infinite lives exploit. It's poor design, but it nullifies any danger of getting a game over for the most part. And even if you do get down to the wire, there's a cheat that gives you 5 extra lives, which is a perfectly fair number in my opinion. But even though this game is at its best when they're giving you these difficult platforming challenges, the game still doesn't go to that well often enough. Usually the platforming is used as a means to an end in the middle of a level instead of something to actually build the game around, and oftentimes the Futurama game relies on arbitrary gimmicks or combat sequences that go on for too long, and man did some of them really go on for too long. And as for some of these gimmicks, yeah, they don't exactly wet my whistle too much. So many of these ideas that they have are basic as it gets. Look at that, you have acid on the floor you have to jump over. Woo. Look at that, you have to look for a pattern on the walls to tell you the order that you're supposed to press the switches in. Double woo. You have sequences where you have to turn valves in order to drain or fill the area you're in. Triple woo. A few of these set pieces in these levels are somewhat unique, like these spinning electrical rods that change position halfway through, an entire chunk of the game with collapsing floors, or obstacles built around Leela's dodge roll, but the most unique thing that this game has at its disposal is probably this chunk of the final series of levels where you have to type in the correct sequence of numbers or die instantly. The first one is almost insultingly easy, but I swear, some of the later ones had it to where they just didn't accept the correct input. Either way, this wasn't interesting the first time. I don't know why they thought to bring it back multiple times, but if there's one thing I can use to describe this game, it would be if it's not worth doing once, it's worth doing 6 or 7 times. More on that in a minute. Although surprisingly, for a game that repeats itself as much as this one, it strangely has 3 distinct sections that show up one time and only one time. First of all, you have the level in New York where you have to pilot one of Mom's, like, chicken bots that look like ATSTs, which I think is supposed to be the joke. It turns the game into a rail shooter section, which is so easy I could probably do it in my sleep. Then you have the level Run Bender Run, which is a blatant as blatant gets copy of the Boulder Chase levels from Crash Bandicoot to an almost insulting degree. But at least it's quick and functional. Then you have the Dr. Zoidberg cameo as a 4th playable character when he shows up for exactly one level to rip off Hog Wild, also from Crash Bandicoot.
Dr. Zoidberg? What are you doing here?
Making a cameo!
I'm not even kidding when I say I was playing this game in a Discord call at one point, and one of the people in the call literally said, and I quote, "You can really tell what this game was inspired by." It's not bad, in fairness. I have my nitpicks, such as the fact that the scenery is somewhat cluttered, and so there are times when there are obstacles that you wouldn't even think are obstacles. For example, in this very instance, you obviously see this thing protruding out from the left side of the screen, so I'm supposed to dodge right. Right? However, there's also a protruding branch on the right side of the screen that will cause you to bail if you touch it. But it doesn't look like an obstacle because it looks so blended into the background, and as per the expected design tropes of levels like this, you don't expect them to put 2 obstacles side by side, especially when one is so obvious and the other is so subtle. So it tricks you, but that's fairly nitpicky. Otherwise, it's a very functional game mode, and the idea that you're supposed to get to the checkpoint within a 2-minute timer keeps you on your toes, especially given the fact that you don't immediately fail if you fall off. But you do lose precious time that you need. But there's still more than enough time to make it through, assuming you aren't completely ham-handed. That covers most of the gameplay, a parade of mediocrity. I'm not gonna lie, the very best part of this game in my opinion is the first level, because all you have to do is go around the Planet Express building and find a bunch of tools that Farnsworth has misplaced, and this level is busting with Futurama Easter eggs. You can go through each one of the lockers belonging to all the different employees, and they each have a little Easter egg relating to the character. Although why Amy has a poster of the gay beach bully, I do not know. But then there's also the Easter eggs just hanging around, like the owls, because it's a running joke to the series that the owls are to the year 3000 what rats are to us right now. Or the aforementioned brain slug taking over Hermes. I love those little guys. Then you have the boiler in the boiler room, which is on the verge of exploding like it did in the episode Parasites Lost. Furthermore, this is one of the few levels that doesn't overstay its welcome, because all you need to do is explore the entire area to find a few items and report back. It's simple, but it works. But if the best part of the game is the fan service to the thing it's adapting, that's probably not a good thing, and I wouldn't even necessarily say the game does the fan service particularly well overall. Aside from the first level and a few things sprinkled here and there really isn't much proper fan service. I was told that if you collect all the nibblers in every level, you can unlock stuff in the extras menu, but I put in the cheat to unlock all the various unlockables, and all it is are the FMV cutscenes from this game, which by all rights should be unlocked by default just by playing the game. I was hoping for some concept art or unique tidbits from the show like most games give you as unlockables, even most crappy tie-in games. Even the gallery is just a gallery of all the loading screens. That is so lame. What kind of reward is that? I feel bad for anybody who decided to 100% this game legitimately, but despite all of my issues, I wouldn't say this game is bad necessarily, because in all honesty, the gameplay is perfectly functional for what it is. The hits connect well enough, the platforming is surprisingly tightly controlled, though the characters do have a bit of a turning radius to go from facing one way to the opposite way, which on narrow ledges can cause issues. Otherwise though, the controls are fine, and the game functions better than most if I'm being honest. It just has no creative spark or desire to be anything more than a painfully mediocre platformer. One that by the 20-minute mark, you've pretty much seen everything it has to offer, and yet it stretches into what feels like infinity. And that leads me into what I believe is the absolute worst part of the Futurama game. It's one of the most ungodly repetitive games I've ever played. It's a 6-hour game that really should have been a 3-hour game. Like, for example, after the opening level at Planet Express, Fry has to go to a pawn shop in the city to get a new engine for the ship. This is one story beat, so naturally you'd think that this entire story beat could be done in one single level, but instead they put you through 6 different levels just to get to the pawn shop. You have to go through the sewers, the subway, Old New York, Uptown, the Red Light District, and finally, New York. And that repeats itself for every chunk of the game. They stretch the absolute living shit out of every single part of this game. It gets to the point where you're playing these really dull, repetitive levels one after another for an hour to an hour and a half, just for one single task. And as I implied earlier, even when we're talking about individual levels, they can go on for so long and repeat themselves so often that even if you come across something you like in the game, you'll probably hate it by the end just through sheer repetition. Like those Simon Says segments where you have to memorize the pattern of squares to step on and then repeat it. Simple enough, except for when I accidentally clip the edge of one of the stones, which activates the wrong stone in the pattern, and then I take damage. But you have to do this same non-puzzle like 7 times. It feels like the same part is repeating so often that I'm playing with a scratched CD or something. I think the absolute worst example of this is in the final chunk of the game, and to be honest, I feel like the final chunk is probably the most interesting part of the game, except for what I'm about to talk about, as well as the aforementioned number combinations, but for the most part, this is where you get the best platforming challenge. But in 2 out of the 3 final levels, you have to go through these facilities and grab keycards that will unlock the door with the corresponding number. Multiple times, they have it to where a keycard has no other purpose except to unlock a door to a room that has a keycard to another door. There's no enemies in the room, nothing to obstruct you or challenge you, it's literally an empty room with a keycard. So the only purpose of the first keycard is to make you backtrack to where the second keycard is. There's no actual gameplay to it, it's all pure padding, and it gets really tiresome. Especially that late into the game, because by that point, I just wanted the thing to end. And you go through all of this boring padded gameplay just to be rewarded with the cutscenes. Cutscenes would be a suitable reward, and in fairness, they are theoretically, because you're basically unlocking chunks of an episode by playing. Plus, this did come a couple of years before YouTube, so you're not exactly going to find cutscene compilations at this point. But it's just not worth it to play the game, because it's one of the most insanely painfully dull repetitive experiences I've played in a hot minute. The fact is, it's not even necessarily that bad. I've enjoyed games that are objectively way more flawed than this. It's just that the problem is, when a game is this boring, it throws every single little issue into sharper relief. In a lot of cases, I'd rather play a bad game than a painfully mediocre one, because at least then it gives you something to talk about, something to feel emotion over. But that might just be a me thing. That said, I do like this game's ending. It's pretty clever in the same way that Bender's big score was clever. By this point, the crew has gone back in time to stop the sale of Planet Express, in which they trashed their own ship, and so they take the ship from the past, ram it into Mom's office, and then try to stop the deal. Then the reanimator breaks, and they all get crushed by the Destructor bot, which is the final boss. Then, get this. Mom convinces Farnsworth to sell the company despite the warnings from the future, all because she threw in a sombrero. The same sombrero that he was randomly wearing at the beginning of the game, of which he had no explanation for. Thus making the game an infinite time loop, ending it in the exact same way it started. That's actually a pretty clever ending. Not enough to save the game though. But with that said, if I continue on, I'm probably going to become more repetitive than the time loop that this game exists in. So I'll just conclude by saying, if you like what I do here and want to support the channel, you can like this video, leave a comment telling me what you think, subscribe, and hit the notification icon so you're always up to date on what I'm doing, because I'm still convinced YouTube is not sending my videos out to my subscribers. And if you want to support the channel in a more direct fashion, you can pledge to my Patreon for unique perks and rewards, such as early access, Discord benefits, exclusive content, and more, along with these fine folks right here. And an extra special thank you to Andrew Ritter, Brooklyn, Dick Kickham, Ga004, Raph, Ranger X, Weird Webster, Ty Trovey, and Monsieur Thenardier for going above and beyond. Elsewise than that, I've been the King of Snark Style right here on Tactical Bacon Productions, and I will see you next time. Stay crispy, my friends.